Welcome back to the channel, guys. I got 5 tips for you today in Lightroom on how I transform this photo to this photo. Tip number 1 is gonna be taking away all the saturation and then bringing it back afterwards. So what I'm gonna do here is I am gonna take away all the saturation, and you're gonna see that the color is just black and white, which is exactly what I'm looking for, because this allows us to see how certain colors affect the shadows and the highlights of the car. So check this out. If I just move this to a cooler temperature, that actually brings up the shadows. And that's kind of where I'm trying to go, because shadows have a lot of highlights that are kind of blackened out, and sometimes they're not. I'm so sorry, guys. They are testing the jets for the air show tomorrow, so it's been non-stop, just going nuts. Probably the worst day to record a video. So I am actually gonna make this a little cooler, about let's see, what were we at? About this much. And then we'll just do a basic adjustment here. Let's check the tints to see how that affects it too. I think we should go a little more towards the magenta side. Yeah, a little more towards the magenta side. And then increase exposure here, definitely, just to make the photo. Oh my god! Increase contrast, decrease highlights. One of the things about shooting automotive photography is that there's actually just any photography in general, highlights tend to be overblown a lot, especially with the sky. You can check here, the sky is completely blown out, so if we just put that back down, we can actually see the clouds up there, so that's really nice. And then you want to increase shadows to recover a lot of those details that were hidden down here that we weren't able to see before. Now it looks a lot better because we can see the details in that. And then bring the texture up a little bit, clarity up a little bit, dehaze adds a little bit of contrast. Been putting vibrance down a little bit, and then just leaving saturation alone because we're going to deal with that afterwards. And then just a quick S-curve here for the nice and contrast. We want to have the highlights kind of fade a little bit, just a little, and then we have the shadows kind of just fade too. So now we have a very contrasty car, and I do want to recover some of the shadows that were lost right there from that tone curve, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so this brings me back to my next step, which is bringing back the colors. The nice thing about this is that now you can see exactly what colors you want back. And we can see that this red is hitting that red line right there, or that red parking zone. It's not too important, and it's not really affecting any other parts of the image, so I am just gonna have it just drown out a little bit so it's not drawing away from the car. And if we increase the orange here, we can see that the orange gives a nice little shine to the back of the car. So we will have the orange come back a little bit. And the yellow too in the photo, just because it was a nice sunset photo. So if we get that back up. The greens here is part of the background, but however, it's not too important. I think the color that we want to capture the most is that orange and that yellow to get that sunset feeling. And then aquas are usually reflective on the windshield of cars, so let's just keep that down. And then this car was a gray color. It had some reflections of blue, so I am just gonna add a little bit there, just a little, to kind of give the color a little bit of gray. So you can see here it's completely black, it's hard to see, but this little bit of gray here, and here we go. That looks good. The blue kind of adds like a little bit of hue to the grayish color of the car. I know it kind of looks black, but it's not black. And then you can see where the purple is it's getting the ground, and that doesn't do much. So the magenta too, so let's get rid of that. What I do want to do is I kind of want to bring up the orange and the yellow a little bit. Maybe a little too blue for me, but there we go. And then we can go into hue, and we can kind of just play around with the colors a little bit. I usually just do according to feel and how I like. Red wasn't too important, so let's just get rid of that. I like this little kind of red orangey tone to it, like this. And then we can bring the yellow more like that too. And now we have a nice looking photo. There we go. And then the trees here, we can make it a little more towards the yellow side, so it kind of helps with the kind of vibe and the theme of the photo, so it's not too, so it doesn't pop up too much, because we want the attention to be around the car. But yeah, so now we bring back the saturation. We went from a black and white photo to this, so just a very quick edit. Tip number 2 is going to be selecting the subject with the auto mask. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to go select subject. This masked the car pretty well. Back then it was such a pain where you had to paint over everything, but now with AI, this has been amazing. So I usually increase the exposure a little bit, that way the car pops more. Increase the contrast. Whenever you're increasing exposure, you do want to increase contrast so it doesn't look weird. Like if we increase exposure like this, like that looks so weird without increasing contrast. So let's do a little bit of contrast here. 0.3 and then contrast. And then whenever you do add contrast, it does take away the shadows a lot. So I want to take away some of the highlights of the car because it's a little too bright, and then add a little bit more shadows back in. I think it's a little too bright for me. It looks a little too edited, so let's just dial back a little bit more. All right, so if we turn this off, so this is before and this is after. So the car is definitely popping a lot more just by adding a very minor changes of adding exposure, contrast, decreasing highlights, and increasing shadows. Aside from that, I usually don't do much aside from just kind of fixing the exposure to the subject or the vehicle. So that's going to be that. Tip number 3 is going to be closing in onto the subject with linear gradients. So you're also going to come to mask here. You're going to add mask and you're going to do linear gradient. So when you do the linear gradient, you kind of want to do about here to draw the viewer's eyes away from the foreground and into the car. So how you do that is you subtract the subject from this, you decrease the exposure, that way you draw away. Remember, our eyes are very drawn to light, so the brightest part of the photo is where you kind of first look at when you're first shown an image. So I draw that away, I increase the contrast, making it even darker, and then I increase clarity, and then I take away more exposure. So now, as you can see, this whole part just kind of draws the eye to the car. And we can do this, and you can see a big difference there with just the masks. And same goes for the sky. The sky is also another thing that has a lot of light. You can select the sky, which is beautiful because it does it really well now. And you can just decrease a little bit of that exposure to kind of get the detail back in. And now we have the focus solely on the car. Tip number 4 is going to be adding motivating light. So what I do is I kind of check to see where the light is coming from, and you can see it's coming from this side. So I look for that light source, and then I add the linear gradient, and then I'm just gonna come through with it just like that. Perfect. And then I usually like to subtract the subject out of it so it's not affecting edits that I did to the car, and then I just add some exposure to that. Since it is a sunset, giving it a little bit of warmth. That way it helps with the color. And then we just have it come all the way through, just like that. And now we have an area where there's motivating light coming in, and it's kind of shining onto the subject, so it brings out more of a focus towards the car. Again, a lot of this is just kind of bringing it back into the main subject of the photo shoot. Last but not least, tip number 5 is going to be using a radio filter to do an inversion to focus in onto the subject. You're going to come over here to the mask, and then I love to do a radio gradient just like that, and then I do an inversion, and that kind of shows you where that overlay is. If you hit O, I do the inversion, that way it does everything else to the photo except for the subject that I put it around. Why I do this is because I put a little bit of a decrease in exposure to the inversion, and that further focuses the attention to the car. And now we have a photo that we went from this to this. That is class. That's good. That's very good. Thank you guys so much for watching this week's video. I hope this has helped some of you in terms of just quick edits on how to make your photos a little bit better. If this video has helped you and you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel a lot. Until next time, I will see you. Peace.